Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Do you want to play games at 4K high detail, 60 frames per second? Do you think you need a $500 or even $1,000 graphics card to do that? You might be surprised because you really don't. Not if you exclude the latest and greatest AAA games. This is a $100 RX 580 8GB card, $100 4K high detail. I have a bunch of game benchmarks to show you today. And I'm not even using some ridiculously overpowered i9 test bench either. This card is installed right here on my Ryzen test bench featuring the Ryzen 5 2600. This is a $120 CPU featured in my recent $580 budget PC build guide for October. I'll link to that below, show you some footage of it right here. That was an all-new computer except for the video card. This is the one component that I would buy used right now. There are dozens and dozens of these available on eBay right now from many great sellers, a variety of cards for $100. It is really the graphics card deal of the day. Now, in that build guide, I showed you 5 different modern AAA games at 1080p high detail with great frame rates. It really does an amazing job. Now, granted, faster graphics cards are faster, and if you want to play Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 4K high, yes, you need an RTX 2080 Ti and spend $1,000 and get all the computer. But not everybody wants to do that. Lots of you want to play games like Fortnite. Many of you want to play World of Tanks or League of Legends or many other games. I have more benchmarks for you in this video. I'm going to show you the chart of the 5 games I tested in the previous video so you don't have to go back and watch it. But if you want to watch the live gameplay footage, there's nearly 15 minutes of me actually playing the game with real-time MSI Afterburner performance numbers in the upper left-hand corner of those 5 AAA games. I'm not going to repeat that here. I'll just show you the chart. So go back and watch that video if you want to see it. In this video, in just a minute, I'm going to show you snippets of footage of games I tested at 1440p and at 4K, and then show you the charts for those as well. Now, if you have all the money in the world, by all means, go buy top-of-the-line hardware. It's fun and cool to play with. But the fact that $100 graphics cards and $120 CPUs will legitimately play all the available games on the market today, you just sort of have to select your detail setting and resolution, but 1080p is a base with this card. You don't have to get down to 720p, and that is pretty cool. If I sound excited, it's just that it used to be to get a really great gaming experience, you had to spend thousands of dollars on your computer. And the fact that you don't, the fact that this is a $580 setup with 16 gigs of DDR4 3000 and $100 graphics card, a great CPU, I love this deal. Well, I could talk on and on, but let's get right to the benchmark, shall we? Our first benchmark is Fortnite. Now this is 1440p, and I have one more game at 1440p, then we'll jump into the 4K results. You can see the real-time performance numbers in the upper left-hand corner from MSI Afterburner. Look at this, we are currently averaging 108 frames per second. The white number in the middle there, that is the current running average. The number just to the right of it, the one that says 54, that's the current running 1% low. The 8 is the 0.1% low. 0.1% lows are such a small, tiny fraction, they generally don't matter. And that number will actually uplift once we get more gameplay tested. I'm not going to show it all to you because the video would be ridiculously long. I played an entire Team Rumble match, and so that went on for some time. And respawns will sometimes, of course, kick that 1% low down. You're going to see that later in another game, just because each time you respawn, it just kicks the frame rate down just for a second. Our VRAM usage is very modest at just under 3 gigabytes, but of course, this is Fortnite. It's meant to run on all kinds of machines. Now, I said this is running at 1440p high. I mean, it's running at 1440p high. I clicked 1440p in the settings, I clicked the high detail button, and I clicked go. I, of course, made sure the frame rate limiter was off and the VSync was off and whatnot. In Fortnite, at high detail, you are actually running one resolution down in terms of render resolution, and then the game is upscaling. So yes, for those of you playing the home game and who are familiar with this, we're actually internally rendering the game at 1080p. The interface, the menus, the screens, the text on the screen, your weapon loadout, etc., that's all being rendered at 1440p. But the raw game itself is being rendered at 1080p and then being upscaled by the game. Yes, that's part of why it does in fact run so well, because if I manually set the render resolution to 100% to 1440p, we wouldn't be doing 100 frames per second. But if you have a 1440p monitor, this lets your text and interface and menu and weapon selection all be extremely crisp native monitor resolution while getting great performance, because after all, with the explosions and everything else, I mean, take a look, the game looks absolutely great. Next up, we have Apex Legends. This is an interesting game to benchmark because when you die, you're out of the match. And so basically you're just... The question is, how much do you engage to get a decent benchmark run? This was actually of a reasonable length. The entire battle in Apex Legends was about 12 minutes long, of which about 11 minutes was benchmarked, which isn't bad, but it doesn't give you the respawns that you get in Team Rumble in Fortnite. If there's a mode in here that lets you do that, well, I haven't found it yet because frankly I don't play this that often. However, I actually did manage to score some damage and some kills, which isn't bad. I stuck with my teammates. We actually did good team play, warning each other, and it worked out pretty well. In fact, I'm about to actually do something stupid that works out and then doesn't here in just a second. I'm showing you towards the end of this match. We're averaging 67 frames per second at the moment, and that's over most... Yeah, that was kind of dumb. Over most of the battle. It is worth noting... Hey, let's go get the stuff in the purple crate. It's worth noting that unlike Fortnite, this is running at 1440p native. It's not being 1080p upscaled. Thus, you're seeing a dramatically different level of performance. However, with native 1440p rendering in a relatively recent game, we're still over 60 frames per second. The 1% and 0.1% lows you can see are not over 60, but again, this is a $100 graphics card. You know, there's a limit to what you can expect. I expect most people trying to play this game on this card will really be playing at 1080p or turn a couple of the details down. I did not tweak the detail settings, shadows and other things. You can make various tweaks to get yourself 10, 20, 30% boost to performance without having to lower the resolution if you just turn off a few of the shiny things. Moving on to Grand Theft Auto 5, one of my favorite games to benchmark and favorite games to run around and cause general mayhem. This is 4K high detail. None of the extended sliders are on, but all the standard sliders are fully maxed out. Soft shadows are included. And yes, this really is 4K on a $100 graphics card. We are using about 3.3 gigabytes of VRAM, and the primary reason for that is simply because this game is several years old and does not have super duper high resolution textures in it. You can set it to 4K, you can set it to 8K, but the internal textures used and some other details don't scale along with it. That's one place where you see some games that really use more texture, more VRAM, is the fact that they have 4K textures, they have higher resolution textures, and so no matter what you set the resolution to, the game's only going to load the quality of the textures and the quality of the images that are included with it. I did for fun try this at 4K very high and ended up restarting the benchmark. My goal here is not to crush the card, my goal is to show what's playable, and 4K very high was not. A GTX 1070 might do that okay, but this card just didn't. In fact, if you look, we're just slightly under 60 frames per second average. We're currently at 59 frames per second. Now, I played this for 20 minutes and had way too much fun, and I would love to show you the entire thing because it was total mayhem and explosions and crazy and everything, and I just would love to. Short version, absolutely completely playable. It was smooth, it was responsive, I had no problems. It may not always average 60, the 1% and 0.1% lows may certainly not be there. This is pretty epic. That is crazy. But the thing is it was always playable. If I had not had the benchmark numbers running, it would have felt fine. I'd have had no issues. It would have just played and been great and had no issues. So this game is completely playable at 4K high detail on a $100 RX 580. Next up, we have Overwatch. 4K high detail, and yes, I did make sure to check the render resolution because it automatically adjusted down to 67%. I manually set that to 100% render resolution, and yes, I know when you set high detail, some of the other settings move around. I adjusted those, and yes, I did remember to restart the game. I only mention it because the detail settings in Overwatch can be kind of finicky. If you don't check the render resolution, if you don't check the sub settings after you set high, if you don't restart the game after adjusting the detail settings, then not all the settings actually reload and readjust. So I did make doubly and triply sure. I got back in the game, I checked the settings, it was all as it was supposed to be. Now with that comment out of the way, 4K, 68 frames per second average at this point in time. The real-time number, we're at 60, 55, 59, 61. Now, is this ideal? If you're a competitive Overwatch player, is 60 frames per second average with 1% lows in the 50s and 40s for 0.1% lows, is that ideal? No, of course not. You want faster performance. Fine, turn the detail down. Turn the detail down to low. You don't need detail if you're competitive. But of course, if you're truly competitive, why would you be playing at 4K? Actually, you could play at 4K. The game auto-adjusted to 67% render resolution. I thought about leaving it there and just saying, hey, this is what the game wanted to run at, because I am sure that there are a lot of people who would load this game up. Maybe not you, but there are a lot of people who would just load it up, accept whatever the defaults are, and start playing, and they wouldn't even think about render scale. I get it, and maybe I should have done both, but everything takes time, and so I didn't. 64 frames per second average, 49 frames per second, 1% low, 44 frames per second, 0.1% low. Now notice the 0.1% low just dropped down to 9. That's because of the respawn. You're going to see that in the benchmark chart as well. Ignore it. It's the frame drop from the respawn. It doesn't mean anything. So look at the 1% low and judge the performance from there. World of Tanks, live gameplay, not the benchmark. I did set the detail settings to high. I turned off dynamic render resolution. This, just similar to many other games, has a dynamic mode which will basically override the settings and play around with them. I turned that off. I made sure that everything was set to 4K. Everything was set to high detail. I did set the interface to 2x scaling because at 4K you can't see anything otherwise. You'll notice my tank's health is terrible, and you'll notice that we are midway through the battle. I ended up I drove right into an ambush on the far western side of the map. I lost almost all of my health, and I retreated because the point here was to benchmark the battle and not... this is my second game I played. The first game I died in the first 2 minutes. It wasn't a long enough run. And so I actually drove here all the way across the map following my teammates. I'm not going to show you the result because it's terrible even saying this, but it will take too long. We won this game. And we won it because we had 3 superstars on our team who ran right through the enemy, ran right to the artillery, ran right to their base, although it was no cap kill all. They did kill everything. I ended up never shooting anything. What can I say? This is not my game in any way, shape, or form, but I did try, and I drove around, and I zoomed in, and I sighted stuff. And so in terms of performance, you can see what to expect. I mean, I got shot a bunch, I got ambushed, I drove over here, I drove by the lake. At this point, from this point in the game, I pretty much drove as straight to the cap circle, and I did enter the cap circle, and I probably got 10 or 20 points worth of cap before the last enemy was destroyed. 66 frames per second average at the moment, and spoiler alert, that's going to hold. That's going to be pretty close to the end number. In any case, let's move on to the next game. World of Warships. I haven't benchmarked this one in a while, but it was my excuse to play it, do some live gameplay testing. You can see here I am in the Republique, the French Tier 10 battleship. My apologies to any Frenchmen if I mispronounce the Republique. It's sort of the American pronunciation, I suppose. In any case, I like this ship. It has good secondaries. The guns are okay. It's fast and maneuverable, although it doesn't have any armor worth a darn. If you play World of Warships, then fair enough. Awesome. Great. Welcome to the club. If you don't, that's okay too. It is a free-to-play World War I and World War II surface, mostly. There are carriers, but surface mostly combat simulation, although it's not really a simulation. It's kind of arcadey, but it is fun. And it's there's just so many ships that you can play, different nations. You can play battleships, cruisers, destroyers. Submarines are in beta testing at the moment, so I guess that negates the surface ships since those submerge, but whatever. This is 4K high detail. I didn't change around any of the settings except reducing the fire effect setting. You can certainly play with it as you see fit. Moving on to the charts. This is the chart that was included in the October 2019 build guide. These were 1080p high detail. You can see the 5 games included here. You can see the frame rates. Great performance. No issues whatsoever. Very, very playable. If you want to watch 15 minutes of live gameplay across these 5 games, go check out the link in the video description below. It starts at 15 minutes and 45 seconds into that video. Just scroll forward to it and watch those results because completely, totally playable. Very nice experience. Moving on to today's video, if you were watching the live gameplay, you already know these results because they're effectively what you saw there. 101 frames per second average in Fortnite with a 66 frame per second 1% low, 53 in Apex Legends with a 44 1% low. That game needs a couple of tweaks to its detail setting just to get it a little bit more comfortable, or frankly play it at 1080p and you'll just have a better experience. 4K high detail. 56 frames per second average in Grand Theft Auto 5, 67 in Overwatch, 66 in World of Tanks, and 65 in World of Warships. All very, very playable. Now, whether or not you like the 1% lows you see here is an entirely personal choice. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe you want over 60 frames per second. Maybe you want 100 frames per second. Fine. Play these games at 1440p, and 100 plus frames per second is doable all day long at 1440p. I just want to show you that you absolutely can play these things at 4K. I have a bonus for you. Now, this might be the most pointless benchmark ever, but I did it because inevitably somebody's going to ask, what about games like League of Legends and CSGO and Dota 2? And yeah, these things run at ridiculous frame rates even at 4K. This is 4K, very high detail, anti-aliasing turned on, and we're over, 224 frames per second average at the moment? The actual true average after the whole 20-minute battle was finished was a little under 200 frames per second, but even the 1% low was way over 100 frames per second. Games like this run on potatoes. RX 580 8GB cards are extreme overkill, but I'm including it because somebody's bound. It's not a chart. There's no chart after this. I'm just showing how overkill cards like this are for the true bottom end of the esports games. I say bottom end in terms of graphically demanding. If you love League of Legends, rock on. But it's bottom of the barrel in terms of what is graphically demanding. Counter-Strike Global Offensive isn't included in here for the exact same reason. It would be ridiculous. It would run at crazy frame rates at any resolution. Turn it down to low, which is what most people do, and the performance is spectacular. Well, that was a whole bunch of benchmarks. I hope you guys appreciate the extra time I spent with this. While I showed the 1080p stuff in the first video, I wanted to come back around and do some higher resolution testing. Several of you asked, where's Fortnite in the original video? Well, there you go. There's Fortnite, and it runs like an absolute champ. As I mentioned before, links in the video description below, both to my original video on this, the $580 complete PC build guide, and to this video card and all these parts on Amazon, Newegg, and eBay. Those are affiliate links. They support the channel. Use those when shopping if you like my content. Use those and get yourself an amazing deal. You'll also find a link down there to different ways to support the channel if you're interested. $2 on Patreon gets you access to the private Tech Deals Discord, supports the channel, and lets us bring more of these videos to you. Follow me on Twitter, give this video a like, smash that sub button if you're not already subbed, hit the bell notification icon next to it, and I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you in the next video.